All right, today we're going to talk about creating the ultimate RFQ. And the reason that I'm passionate about this is because for the last 20 years, I have received RFQs from customers. I've created some actually prior to me crossing over to the dark side and getting into sales. My name is Russ Sorrells, by the way, with CapEx Sales. But prior to crossing over to the dark side, getting into sales, I was an engineer at Cummins Engine Company, a great company up there in Indiana. And I wrote a few RFQs for some various pieces of equipment that I had purchased. And so that began my career as an engineer and learning request for quote. My first capital project was a total disaster. I bought a wash system and I didn't really have a request for quote. And the equipment was late, and it didn't have or meet some of the requirements that we had internally, and it was over budget. So that was my first exposure to capital equipment, and it was a failure as a manufacturing engineer overall. But I learned a lot of lessons, and what we're going to talk about in this conversation are some of the lessons that I've learned over the years of receiving requests for quote and experiencing some of the heartache that our customers have experienced, maybe because things weren't as clearly documented as they wish they had been. So we're going to talk through some of that today. Again, encourage your questions. Pretty important topic here with these RFQs. So to familiarize you with CapEx Sales, we represent companies here in North Carolina, South Carolina, as well as Virginia. We represent ATC Automation out of Cookeville, Tennessee. The one thing that I always say about ATC is 85% of our business is from repeat customers. That means year over year, we get new customers, that's 15%, but 85% of the business that we do is with repeat customers. And if you are in the automation world, you know that there's a lot of dead bodies out there, a lot of one and done companies. ATC is not that company. They like to build relationships. That's what matters to them. Cincinnati Test Systems in Ohio, they are the largest leak test company in the world. So we say when I started working with them, I think we had, or I say we, but I think they were about a $5 million a year company, and they have continued to grow and grow and grow. I've been, excited to have been a part of that through natural organic growth and then acquisitions. They've become the largest leak test company in the world. Duquesne Plastic Joining out of Illinois. They are a global and diverse plastic joining company, ultrasonic welding, hot plate welding, laser welding, vibration welding, spin welding, welding of plastics, you name it, that's what they do. That's their life. Symetric is a part of the Cincinnati Test Systems group, but they're a little unique. They do high-speed in-process data management. They also have some components and equipment or systems that we can purchase or that you could purchase as well. But their world is really processing data and then making decisions with that data. Keller Technologies out of Fort Mill, South Carolina. All things industrial air filtration solutions. Again, my name is Russ Sorrells, and I am one of the team members here at CapEx. Today, we're going to talk about creating the ultimate project specification. So let's jump into it here. So the components, or what we're going to talk about, the components of storytelling. So creating the vision for your project, why that's important both internally and externally. Request for quote components. What should be in there? What should you include in your request for quote? Who should you involve in your organization to help ensure that you get the most accurate and comprehensive request for quote, and then how to put that request for quote together so it makes sense and definitely conveys what you want with this project. And then reference documentation, very important, obviously. Drawings, the specifications that might need to go along with the components that are going to be assembled. So gathering all of those are going to be important resources that you're going to want to provide to your vendors as well. So now we're going to jump right into the storytelling portion. This is often overlooked and not something that people are inclined to do. But we want to ensure that we are telling a story about this project. And again, the reason that we do it is we want to be able to convey that story internally, why this project is important. What difference is it going to make for your facility? Why should your people be excited about it? Why should your management invest in this project? Why should they spend the money or invest the money in this capital project? So as a manufacturing engineer, a process engineer, a project engineer, we need to create a story or weave a narrative together that makes sense, that's going to get people excited about this project, because there's a lot of work that goes into bringing a project to life, and it really begins with this request for quote. Oops. All right, so we need to begin with the end in mind. So that's the story that we're telling, right? So we want to do everything with the end in mind. So we're going to essentially, the story that we're going to create is when this project is done, it's going to be located in this portion of the facility. It's going to be producing X number of parts per year. It's going to be, there's going to be nothing like it in the industry. It's going to use cutting edge technology. We're going to, again, describe exactly what your vision is for this equipment and the location, and just create that vision for your people and for your vendors. Now, I want you to think about building it twice. Everything that you see that has been constructed has been built twice. Every skyscraper, as an example, the skyscrapers are built twice. First, in the imagination of the architect, and then second, when they're brought to reality through the actual construction process. So what you are doing as a manufacturing engineer, creating this request for quote, you are essentially building it for the first time. That's what this request for quote is. You're building it in your mind and creating what it is and controlling the narrative of the project that you are doing. So you're telling a story, you're building it twice. First in your imagination, and then second when it becomes reality through the vendor that you select to have build the equipment. Story progression. So we're going to progress through a story, and this is how you're going to tell that story. So you're going to describe the current situation. We are currently producing X number of parts per year, and our equipment is X number of years old, and we're having these quality issues, these challenges. This is, again, you want to tell the story of your current situation. Then you want to have this call to action. Why is it necessary? Why is it necessary that we invest the money, that we make the effort in producing this equipment? Why would we move forward with it? Again, it's about creating a need and motivating people to fill that need with the equipment that you are creating the vision for. Who can help? So who in your organization can help, with you in creating or telling the story, creating the narrative? Maybe there are vendors out there that have specific expertise that you can utilize, or they can help you create this narrative as well, and be a part of this story that you're telling. And what challenges do you expect or anticipate? Yeah, we're going to use the latest technology that has been applied in other industries, but hasn't necessarily been applied in our industry. Explain that. Let people know what the potential challenges are moving forward with this project, so that no one's caught off guard or surprised, right? This is about communication. Again, it's about storytelling and creating that narrative. Why it matters. Why should your organization invest in this equipment? Why is this going to make a difference for your facility? As an example, some facilities over the years, they lose their production. Maybe this project gets canceled, this one gets outsourced to a different company. Before you know it, you've got a facility that has half of its equipment running. Well, if you get a new program and you've got to invest in new equipment, that is exciting. That's exciting for your facility. It means some hope for the future, right? Some longevity in that facility and for the people that work there that rely on the salaries that they receive from that company. So why is this important? Describe that. And then that future state I mentioned, what does it look like in the end The future state of this project is going to be producing X number of parts. It's going to be producing this kind of quality. It's going to be, second to none. It's going to be a showcase, a showpiece for our entire company. It's going to be a place that we're going to bring our customers into checkout. Let's talk about some examples here. Well, let's just walk through an example. So here's a current situation example. Our facility is currently producing 400,000 throttle body assemblies per year. The call to action. Ford has awarded a new throttle body for the P767 program that will require production of 120,000 units per year. So that's additional on top of the 400,000 that we're already producing. So we're going to be up over 500,000 throttle bodies per year in our facility. Who can help? Well, the Panther project team has been assembled to successfully launch this project. So let's say, internal to your company, you've got a project team, describe that team. Who are they? That project, so I just called it the Panther project team in this case, maybe because I'm in Charlotte, that's where the Panthers are. But so you're going to create a team internal to your organization to help you manage this project. So the challenges that are expected. So the timing is tight for the project and the budget is aggressive. The design is not frozen because of engine configuration challenges. So this is a very common narrative that we would have, right? So it seems like every automotive project, those are the things that we have. The timing's tight, the budget's tight, and the project or the design is not frozen. But getting those things out there and communicating that is important from the very beginning. This is about communication. That's what project management has a lot to do with. It's really 90% communication and keeping everyone on up to speed with what's going on. Okay, so who can help? The challenges, we talked about those, why it matters. So this is our first opportunity to serve Ford. So our desire is to grow our business with Ford, and to do so, this must launch flawlessly. So that's why it matters. This is why this is important to our organization, is our relationship with Ford moving forward. We've identified them as a key or target customer that we want to grow their business, grow with, and this is our first opportunity to serve them. The future state. This new equipment will apply the latest technologies, including collaborative robots. The quality checks will ensure 0 ppm. The data will be filtered, will be filtered through the latest AI software to alert of developing issues. It will be self-healing, whatever miracle we are proposing for this equipment. So I want to tell you a little story about, there's a guy that I was working with many years ago, and this is what kind of triggered the idea of this vision format for creating and storytelling for RFQs. He had this vision in his head that the operators would log into each station using their badge. So the same badge that was scanned to get into the facility, he wanted that to be, the operator had to log in to the station, because obviously he wanted to have a level of accountability. Well, this hadn't been done, at least we hadn't done it before, and it was something new. So he had this vision, he shared it with us, and we, everything's sharing. Is that correct? Is everything good, Chris?
Everything is good.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm not talking to myself here. It said sharing is paused, so everybody can see everything?
I'm seeing the ultimate project spec and example why it matters on your slide.
Okay.
Russ.
All right, perfect. Thank you. All right, so his vision was that these operators would log in. Well, what a brilliant idea. I mean, it's simple, but it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you want the operator, you want to ensure the operators are trained on the stations before they operate them. So this badge scanning required them to be trained, because if they weren't trained, they weren't going to be certified to use that station or operate that station. And then it also had a level of accountability associated with it, so that we knew who was clocked in, or he knew who was clocked in on that station. And so if there was a defect associated with that station, there was a place to go and someone to talk to about what they experienced. So it was, again, not an earth-shattering concept, but we had never done it. We had never implemented it. And at the time, none of the customers that I had ever worked with throughout my career had ever even thought of that. So that was a breakthrough because he had a vision and he shared that vision with us, and then we applied it to our product. So, all right. So that is the idea of the vision, the storytelling that you want to have. So now we're going to get into the specific components that go into your request quote. All right, so the general information. Of course, the key contacts. Who in your organization is going to be responsible for seeing this project through? What are the key dates that you are going to want to ensure that are there? The key start dates for the program, expectations for when that equipment should hit your facility. Now, on the key dates, let's, I don't know if we can back up. Yeah, so we'll back up here. It's important that you understand.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure you're on the right slide here, and there is no delays, but it's the same slide with future state as the bullet.
Okay.
There you go. That looks good.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. So we'll go back. So the key contacts, obviously, that's important that the people, the vendors that you are sharing this with, know who to contact for this project, who's going to be responsible for which area of the project. Key dates. What dates are important for your company, for your organization? It's important that you identify this, and something that you need to keep in mind is that oftentimes the quotations that vendors will provide, they state the length of time that it will take them to build and run off the equipment, right? So they're going to say 36 weeks to run off. If you are wanting it to be in your facility in a specific time, you got to make sure that you're comparing that date, because that date isn't a delivery date to your facility. That is a date for runoff. And I only mention that is because over the course of my career, I found that to be an area of consternation, of challenge for some of our customers that were thinking that they were going to get the equipment in 36 weeks when in fact it was going to be run off at our facility, at the vendor's facility, in 36 weeks. So just make sure that all the dates line up as you are laying them into your matrix and identifying and selecting vendors. Volumes. You want to be very clear on what volume of parts that you're going to be providing. What is the cycle time requirement? This is another area that we often get confused, frustrated, that it's important that we understand what is the OEE expectation. What is the time that we should use? Do you work 2 shifts, 3 shifts? How much break time do you have? So understanding all of those aspects are really important for putting this, communicating cycle time expectations. And I encourage you as the customer to tell the vendors, I expect a part to come off this line every 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 100 seconds, whatever it is. Don't let the vendor figure out what that should be, because their method of calculation could be different from yours and misleading. So it's important that you get that clear. Again, I mentioned, how many shifts do you work per day, how many hours, so that it goes into everything. What's your OEE expectation? What is the available floor space that you have in your facility? You need to identify also where the columns are and be very specific as far as what supplies you have. What is your air supply? What is the water supply if you were to need water? Do you have a central system for the coolant in your facility? So if you've got a machining operation, so make sure that you're clear in what resources are already available and what resources will need to be provided by the vendor or that you'll need to create internally. The facility current utilities and capacity. So that's just what I mentioned there as well. That we want to be, make sure we're putting it out there. All right, so continuing on the specification components. So process sequence, process. So as far as the process sequence goes, this kind of goes back and forth because some people want to be specific. They want to tell the supplier, this is exactly how we want you to process this product. Now, and if it's a mature product, obviously it makes sense. No sense reinventing the wheel. If you know how to put it together, tell the vendor or supplier exactly what your expectations are sequentially for putting it together. If it's a new program, new project, new product, maybe offer some guidelines for putting it together, but don't tell them exactly how to do it. Suppliers and vendors, they've got far more experience at putting things together than we do as engineers, especially if we've only been with one company or even if we've only been with a couple of companies. The companies that we're going to be working with have vast experience in putting things together. So let's utilize their knowledge, their experience to help us create a more efficient or potentially robust process. So don't count them out by giving them such stringent guidelines that they can't be creative in the process. And selfishly, as a supplier, sometimes that's an opportunity for me to differentiate my organization because I'm looking at it, I decide to assemble it backwards as an extreme example. And you say, wow, I didn't even think about that. And that makes a lot of sense. So when you restrict someone's creativity, you could restrict the performance of the equipment long term. Process specification. Now with this, I'm talking about press force, torque, and those type of specifications that you're going to be providing so that vendors can size the components of the equipment accordingly. The process documentation or part documentation. So obviously 2D drawings, 3D drawings, everything that you have that is specific to the parts. Tell the customer, how does it function? What is the function of the part? So describe it in detail, or even provide a sample or a video or something that talks about how the part functions. It's important that they have an understanding because if they understand it, it will be intuitively easier for them to come up with the process and quote the product assembly or process that they are developing for you. Define a good part. What is a good part? This is where we often miss it. So we don't take the time to identify the critical characteristics of a part when it is in a customer's hand. So what really matters for this part? How do we describe a good part? And how are we going to measure for that good part long term as well? What are the runoff criteria? You want to be clearly defining what it is that you expect your vendor or supplier to do in order to confirm that the equipment is producing per this specification that you're creating. So what are the plans? So the runoff, quality, safety, maintenance, all those. So we want the people, the team members that you have, you want them to create plans. So you want to have a runoff, and that's going to be on you. Your quality engineer is going to tell you or create a quality plan so that you know what it is that you're going to need to measure at the time of runoff. And then they're going to need supply gauges, right, for this. So you want to share any plans that you have for this equipment with your suppliers so that they can understand how they're going to be measured and the expectations that they're going to be required to meet. All right, so we're continuing on our specification components. So system documentation samples. So you want to provide samples of system documentation. For example, the part drawings. You want to provide a template for your part drawings that you want in your facility. Another is controls documentation. How do you want your controls to be documented? What's the specific sequence or strategy that you prefer that a vendor use when they are programming the equipment? So it's best to provide that up front because after the fact, it could cost you money if you're not very explicit in how you expect the vendor to supply the product. To supply or to do the programming or supply the documentation. Logistics. So what are the individual component line side presentation? How are you going to bring the product into the line? That's important because if we come up with a concept for a line that doesn't allow the product access, then we're all going to be in trouble, right? We need to have a way, a method for getting the components that need to be assembled to the assembly line or to the process. So risk areas defined. What are the risk areas in the design, in the process, as well as the timing? Remember, as a project manager, your job, your main role is to manage risk. That is what you're doing. You're managing risk for your organization. Risk comes in two forms. One is a financial override. So you've got a budget. If you go over the budget, now all of a sudden the budget that you use to justify the purchase of the equipment is out the door because the return on investment is going to be less as a result of a cost overrun. So risk number one is money. Risk number two is timing. Timing is going to impact your customer, and so that relationship will be impacted. It'll also impact when your company can begin recognizing revenue, right? So revenue is what justifies the equipment most of the time in the first place. So if you delay the program, you're going to jeopardize the revenue. So just keep that in mind as a project manager. Those are your two main areas of risk that you've got to keep an eye on. So identifying those risks up front help you be able to communicate intelligently to your management, people internally, as well as your suppliers with the expectations. Okay, debug and runoff part supply schedule. Now, if you have ever been involved with a project before, you know that getting parts to do the debug, getting parts to do a runoff, very challenging and a great big pain in the butt. So let's start that process now. What's that schedule look like so that you can share that with your purchasing team internally? Set those expectations so that you don't get caught blindsided and not have the equipment or not have the components that you need to do the appropriate debug and runoff. Because it's pay me now or pay me later. That's the bottom line with debug components. Either you spend the money, make the investment to get the equipment right in the beginning, or it costs you money throughout the life of that equipment because you never properly debugged it, and you end up chasing your tail the entire time you have the equipment because you can't take it down to get it right, and it's a losing proposition. So pay me now, pay me later. My recommendation, based on my experience, is you spend the money up front so that you don't have to deal with the quality issues, the downtime issues, everything that comes from not doing the appropriate debug process. All right, lessons learned. You want to make sure that you're sharing the lessons from your other projects. So every project should have a lessons learned component where you're taking the time to understand, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What do we want to do more of in the future? And so you want to share those lessons learned with your suppliers so that they can put that into their consideration. So if you've completed a process FMEA, highly encourage you to share that with your supplier as well. It's very useful information for them to understand where some of the risks are as it relates to the process or assembly that they are looking at. All right, so those are the major components of the specification. I know there's a lot that goes in there for that. So let's talk about the specification team. You're going to want to put together a team to help you, an internal team to help you create this specification. Because if you do it all on your own, it's going to be on you when it doesn't work out. So the best strategy, at least the strategy that I found, is that when there's a team involved in creating the specification, everyone is held accountable, everyone's on the same page, and they operate more cohesively moving forward. So who can contribute to the development? Quality engineer, right? They're going to do the runoff and acceptance plan. The IT person, so they're going to do the data management and server connection plan. You need them involved. The maintenance folks, so the maintenance is going to talk about the new processes, or are there softwares that we have used or haven't used? What technology training is going to be required? Is there a new robot? Is there what's new on this equipment? And then how will maintenance play a role in certifying, verifying that the equipment is as they expect it and need it so that they can properly service it. Purchasing. So purchasing needs to be involved because they're the folks that are going to issue the purchase order. And nowadays it seems that purchasing is a lot more involved in the process. So it's important that we have them engaged and committed. This is where I see the biggest disconnect is that purchasing sits somewhere else and the engineer is at the facility that is going to be responsible for the equipment. Well, purchasing really doesn't have a lot at risk, not much skin in the game, but yet they're given a significant latitude to make decisions in the purchase of equipment that in the reality of they're just concerned about price most often. And so that disconnect sometimes causes some grief. So it's important. I encourage engineers to engage purchasing at all levels to ensure that they are committed to the success of this project for your team. And then the next here is materials. So materials are going to be providing the debug and runoff components. And if they aren't on the same page, if they're not committed to your success, then you're not going to get what you need to properly debug and run off the equipment. I've already rambled on long enough about the importance of that, but get them involved, hold them accountable. They need to be a part of this team and a part of this process for you to be successful as a project engineer. And then the operator. So you want to make sure your operators are in there because they're going to have the lessons learned. They're the people that are going to be, operating this equipment. They have done it in the past, most likely. So you want their input moving forward. They can save you for sure.
Russ, I might just add that there's an important role that environmental health and safety personnel play in this and should be considered on the spec team. You might want to touch on that.
Absolutely, that's a great point, Chris. I can't believe that I missed that here, but you are exactly right. Safety is always a part of this in any organization, especially nowadays. Safety is going to ensure that the operators are safe. They have a specific guidelines that they are required to follow that are consistent with what your plant-specific guides are, as well as your company-wide specifications are. So thank you for that. Having a safety person involved is very important. All right, spec content. So we're going to continue on this. So what you're going to present, so the logical progression of a spec. So key contacts with contact details. Now we're building the quotation, right? We're building out the essentially the table of contents here. So we're going to explain quote submittal and selection process. It's important that your suppliers and vendors and even people internally understand how you guys make selections. How do you choose the supplier that you're going to use moving forward? Is it a matrix-based decision? Is it a pull out of the hat? Is it lowest price? What is the strategy that you use in determining in selecting the vendors? So how would that whole process work? The program specifications or specifics, what the specific details about the program. It's important that is laid out. So the customer, so program specifics. Who's the customer? What's the product? What's the volume? What's the start date of production? Is it new? Is it a retrofit? What type of equipment is this? And then the next component is we want to tell the story of the project. Remember, start to finish. What does this look like? What are the expectations? Be very clear and detailed in what you're expecting of your vendor. There's part of our brain. It's called the reticular activating system. I'm going to get a little off track here just for a second. The reticular activating system it's a scientifically proven. It exists. It's that mechanism that when you buy a new van, you get a new white Honda Odyssey. I just mentioned that because that's our van. We have a white Honda Odyssey. When you get that van, all of a sudden you see that every other person in the world has a white Honda Odyssey. You never noticed it before, but your reticular activating system is primed through the ownership of a white Honda van to see that. So the reason that telling the story is so important is you are projecting the vision into someone's brain. You're helping them see that. So you're activating their reticular activating system. You're triggering it, right? So they're gonna follow along with you. I know it sounds a little woo-woo scientific, but really works. It's proven. It is a part. So that's why the storytelling component is so important to ensuring that you get what you want, because that's what this is about. Getting what you want, minimizing the pain in your side related to the equipment, ensuring the quality. You want to be a hero in your organization, and you want your organization, your facility, to be a hero and example for all the other facilities. So what are the critical dates? The process sequence, ideally with the models that go along with them. General layout with floor space, or if you can even provide CAD models or CAD layout for your facility as well, that is very helpful. So that's the logical progression of your specification. Continue on here to those logical spec components. The BOM, right? So the bill of materials. What's the part matrix? Can you have an exploded view? What can you provide as it relates to detail to ensure that it's clear? So the torque specifications, I mentioned that. Quantities, line side material handling requirements. We want to know the program risk. I mentioned how important it is that we clearly define those risks. Quality requirements. What are the key quality characteristics that you're going to be looking for, and what is the acceptance criteria? How do we know as a supplier that our equipment is producing product to the quality that you are expecting? That oftentimes is a bit fuzzy. So it's important as a customer, as you are creating this request for quote, you're very clear on what a good part looks like, feels like, functions like. So what are those acceptance criteria? And then the runoff criteria go hand in hand essentially with those quality requirements and acceptance criteria. What is although this is more equipment related, what is the uptime expected for that? How many faults are you going to allow in a specific time frame, et cetera, et cetera. So getting clear on the expectation for the vendor, very important. Part and data and part tracking requirements. So you're going to use a palletized system. Is it going to be station by station? What data are you collecting? Is the equipment, or are the components serialized? Do they have a matrix, a 2D matrix on there that's going to be scanned at each station? Is there an RFID tag that's going on the pallet? What are you going to do with the data, and how are you going to track the data and ensure that it's sticking with the part as it's moving through? Are you going to put a sticker on the part and scan it at each station? Those are the things to answer up front, to get that understanding up front and not answer it after the fact. So what are the cycle modes? Manual, dry. Are you going to be able to step through it? Are they going to be? Do you need homing processes? What are the modes that you're going to want to make sure that the stations have in order for you to troubleshoot the equipment and dial it in? What are the utility requirements? We mentioned this. Does it need helium? Does it, how much compressed air is it going to require? You're going to have a hydraulic unit. What kind of, you're going to need three-phase. What are the requirements from a utility perspective? What are the spare parts expectations that you have? Do you expect a list? How do you expect that to be defined? And then what are your specific warranty requirements for this equipment? So those are some things you want to make sure that you're stepping through, that you're defining for your vendors and want to be included in your quotation. All right, so some of the supplemental aspects that you're going to want to consider, and I know this is a lot of detail, and I honor you for sticking with us as we go through this, but this all matters. This is material information that can make or break you as it relates to the success of your project. So the greater the detail, the more information, the clearer the vendor will be as far as the expectation. There will be no wiggle room to say, hey, you didn't tell me this. You say, well, no, actually, yeah, it's all right here. I was very clear in what we were providing. So you want to take away that ambiguity with your specification. The only area that you want to be somewhat ambiguous possibly is in that processing mode, rather than box a supplier into a specific process sequence. As I mentioned, offer them some latitude, or require a specific sequence be quoted, but ask them to quote alternatives. What would they suggest as alternatives is one way to tackle that as well, if you have a specific sequence that you want them to follow. Okay, now we're talking about spec supplements. So these are going to need to be provided beyond the specifications to help provide greater clarity for the product that the customer is going to be manufacturing. Are there functional test requirements? If you're putting a pump together, at the end of that assembly equipment, there's going to be a functional test. What are those functional test specifications and expectations for that equipment? Provide that to your supplier. What are the facility safety specifications? You need to provide that to your suppliers as well, so they're meeting those requirements. The facility preferred components list. So, if you use Promise, then you don't want them to provide a Kistler necessarily, or maybe you could have them quote a Kistler as an alternative, or vice versa, right? So it's important that you are specific in the components that you want them to utilize, but allow them an opportunity to offer maybe a more robust solution or a more cost-effective solution. Don't take that latitude away. You handicap yourself when you ignore suggestions from vendors that have the experience. The facility maintenance specification. So this is important as well, right? So you have your maintenance specifications. You want to provide that for your vendors as well. So this is the wiring protocol, the pneumatic system protocol. What's the coloring of the pneumatic wires? So some customers, as an example, they'll have red as the air supply to an air cylinder, and blue as red as the extension and blue as the retraction of a cylinder. So some people are that specific in setting the expectation. So you want to make sure you're mentioning that and talking about it up front. What is your MSDS protocol? So if you got a process that's going to require new fluids into your facility, it's important that we have those material safety data sheets correctly organized in the way that you expect to have them in your facility. Controls protocol. What is the fault recovery? What are the fault descriptions? That's the biggest challenge that we all have as it relates to controls, is not having the proper descriptions. Something goes wrong and we're like, we don't know what the next step is in the sequence. Spare parts list. So these are things, again, that your maintenance team should be supplying. What is the preventive maintenance details and that you are looking to receive as well. And then finally, your facility IT specification. Sometimes facilities will allow you to bring a server in or buy a server from, say, Dell, and then that will host your data and it'll be synchronized up to a host. But nowadays, there's much tighter IT controls, so it's important that you share that expectation with your vendors. All right, cranking through this. So so continuing on with the ultimate specification here, visual specifics. All right, so how should the equipment look and feel? This sounds kind of touchy-feely, but it's important that the vendor supplies a piece of equipment that is not completely unique to your facility, right? If you do blue and they do black, well, that's probably a problem. If you do steel bases and they do aluminum, then that's probably a problem. If they do pallet systems but you only do dials, well, that's going to be a problem, right? So what is the look and feel that you have for the equipment? What is important to you? PLC program structure. So we want to clearly articulate what your facility structure is. We've talked about that before, but don't hesitate to let them know, because otherwise you end up with 10 pieces of equipment in your facility from 10 different vendors. You're going to have 10 different languages. It's like this machine reads Egyptian, and this machine reads Spanish, and this machine reads German, right? So it's important that you have equipment where you share some guidelines as it relates to the PLC programming, so that you don't have a bunch of dissimilar programs that your PLC people internally have to decipher. So make sure that you are laying out those expectations. What is the HMI? So you want to maintain some consistency with your HMIs throughout your facility, so that if an operator transfers from this line to that line, it's not like they're looking at something completely different, right? So you want to have a similar layout, maintain consistency. It will improve quality. It will reduce the number of crashes for your equipment, and just it'll make it overall better in your organization, in your facility. Documentation. So you want to be clear on and share examples of what you expect for the different components or different aspects of documentation. Wire tagging, very important. Again, every company seems to do it differently. So you want to make sure you're clear on how you expect the vendors or suppliers to tag the wire, or do the wire tagging. Guarding, again, is it wire mesh? Is it plexiglass? What are the guarding expectations? What is the finish? Do you finish the tabletops, the working tops? Is that painted with a specific type of material? Is it dipped or ionized stainless steel, or is it what are those specifications? What's the finish expectation? Drawing. So again, we talked about the drawing templates. Make sure that's clear so that that's consistent with what you're receiving in your facility. What are the operator preferences that you have in your facility? Get your operators involved. Do they need lighting? Do they need fans? Do they need cup holders? What do they need to, again, maintain consistency, but provide them with some of the creature comforts that are going to help them perform and be more efficient and effective in their job? All right, crank it through. Reference documentation. So why all the detail in this RFQ? Well, we want to eliminate ambiguity. As I mentioned already, we want to allow accurate quotes, right? We don't want, the more detail that we provide, sometimes that drives cost. We got to be aware of that. But the more likely it is that we're going to have a consistent range for our quotations. What you'll find with some suppliers, they'll give you a 5-page quote, while another supplier will give you a 20-page quote with the same amount of information. So I would lean toward the 20-page quote, unless it's just a bunch of fluff and templated stuff. But the more detail that your supplier provides as well is going to be a determinant of how detailed they're going to be during the build process as well. So it's important to keep that in mind. So the detail is going to provide for allow for accurate quotes. It's going to minimize project changes. Remember, I talked about risk and our responsibility as project managers, managing risk, cost overrun, timing, all impacted by changes, right? So when we change something, it could impact the timing. It's almost always going to impact the price. So that's going to put us out of budget potentially. So keep that in mind. The more detail, typically the less changes that you're going to have, and it reduces the overall risk, which is our job as project managers, as I mentioned. And it ensures, again, that we're all on the same page. There's no, we're very clear in what we're expecting from our suppliers. And so document of reference when disputes arise. So if there's a dispute, you want to have the details so that you can say, look, right here in black and white, clearly articulated what it was that we were expecting in this particular area, whatever it is that you're disputing. So that is why these reference documents are so darn important. Okay, so we are continuing to crank through here. So what are the supplier communications? What to provide? You want to provide the detailed RFQ. You want to provide the models and 2D drawings. You want to provide sample parts if possible. Sample parts are so important in helping the vendors wrap their mind around what it is that we're assembling. I know we had an opportunity here a while back, and we got the prints and models. We got the models for this product, and we're trying to wrap our mind around it, and the engineer's quoting it, and the sales guy had an opportunity to get his hands on some components. It was actually Chris. So Chris got his hands on some components, sent them to the applications engineer, and the applications engineer was like, whoa, these parts are way smaller than I was anticipating. So he had, because he had the models, he just had a different mindset as it related to the size of the parts. But then when he received the parts, it changed his strategy and method. So sample parts can be impactful in helping us ensure that we get an accurate quote and that the processes that we're proposing are applicable for the part size. So company general specifications. I know when I was at Cummins, we had a spec book. It was like this thick, and that's a little bit overboard in some cases, but detail is important, ensuring that we get consistent equipment. Supplemental specifications, I already mentioned that. That's what some of those are. Functional test, as an example. So reference, so control structure, panel labeling, documentation, templates for your drawing templates, and then FTP site access is a great strategy or a great method of of transferring documents, these big files that you're going to be transferring back and forth. So common mistakes. This is very important. I know we've gone long here, but I want to make sure this is very good stuff as it relates to ensuring that we get that you have the protections that you need when creating a request for quote. Failure to plan for rework. Do you want to disassemble a component? So if you have an assembly that made it halfway through the process and was rejected for some reason, at what level do you want to break that piece of or that component down and reintroduce it to the equipment? Oftentimes we don't have a rework plan, or our customers don't have a rework plan. So it's important that you consider that before you select a supplier, because you need to understand introducing a product halfway through is a challenge, because you're going to have to either bypass all the operations. You are relying on a human being to make a decision as far as the assembly level of that component that you're reintroducing to the line. So there's a lot to consider as it relates to reintroducing product and reusing equipment that you have torn down. So keep that in mind. Failure to plan for changeover. So sometimes we'll get into a project and customers will say, yeah, we want to do a running changeover. Well, a running changeover is very different than run the line clean and start anew. So it's important that that expectation is clear up front. What are the changeover expectations? Do we want it in 15 minutes? Does it need to be in 5 minutes? Does it need to be on the fly changeover? So communicating that detail, very important and oftentimes overlooked. So we're too restrictive on the process sequence. I've talked about that at length here. It's really important that we allow the suppliers and vendors some level of creativity. Failure to plan for component presentation and packaging to the line. So any layout, if I was a customer, I would require that it include racks that are going to supply. So either the pallet of parts or racks, flow racks. The parts are going to have to get to the line. That's a key component. So you need access, and we need to see how that's going to flow from the very beginning, not after the fact. And oftentimes it is after the fact. Lack of detail regarding control. So there's no specific detail regarding the controls expectations. And then we get that detail after the fact, and it's going to be very onerous. So that costs a lot of money. It takes hours. So we're talking about hours. So if you're going to add hours to a project, it's going to add dollars and cents. So it's important that we are clear in the beginning on those controls expectations. What's the fault recovery protocol? How much detail do you want? Oftentimes we don't provide the right detail, or we provide too much detail. So it's important that we're very clear as a customer what to provide. And then we have too much emphasis on flexibility. I can't tell you how many times customers have insisted that this equipment be flexible. We've got to be able to take this station and then reapply it somewhere else in the facility. And that sounds amazing. It sounds like a great idea, and we have talked about it ad nauseum with customers. The problem is that reality is that these pieces of equipment are often utilized for multiple years, producing the same product. And so when you go to change over, or when you go to introduce a new product, the equipment is not available to do or implement the new piece of equipment. So we've focused on flexibility, but the reality is it's not flexible at all. So because of the need to produce product. And then we attempt to reinvent the wheel. I had a customer one time, this facility had been assembling products the same way for 50 years. It had been in existence, right? And this engineer was like, you know what? Who's to say we can't build them upside down? Seriously, that's what he said. Who's to say we can't build them upside down? He said, we always say we do it that way because we've always done it that way, and we're going to change it up. We're going to do it different. And he was adamant throughout the quoting process that that's what was going to happen. Well, turns out that the way that they'd been assembling it for 50 years was the right strategy for assembling it. So be careful when you're getting creative or getting cute in trying to reinvent the wheel, because if it's been done before, it's probably been done that way for a reason. So it's not that we just accept it and move on, but we need to ensure, or at least have some level of confidence that the people that have gone before us weren't complete idiots, right? So that's just important to keep in mind. So lack of detail equals more risk for your suppliers, and then it costs money. So no detail, more risk, more money. So it's important that we provide this level of detail to ensure that we aren't getting ourselves in trouble. All right, let's bring this home. Summary. Tell a story for your project. Create an executive summary to provide for your management. Be clear on how your company's purchasing process works. How's this going to go? Engage your key team members. Get people involved. That gets ownership internally and helps to ensure that you've got people supporting a project that they've been involved with from the beginning. Provide lots of detail for your suppliers. Provide all the supplemental specifications for your suppliers as well. All right, now moving forward, we're going to be talking about Industry 4.0. I've got a guest with me next week as we talk about Industry 4.0 and what to do with the data. We all got lots of data. What the heck do we do with it? Managing Capital Projects 101. We're going to start that series on the 27th. Hopefully this has been valuable for you. As I always say, we are grateful for your business. We're grateful for you. We would not exist if it weren't for your support. So these are your guys. We got Mike Dorsey in South Carolina. We've got Chris Mullins in Eastern North Carolina and Virginia, and then we've got Adam Hooper in Western North Carolina and select upstate areas. So call on those guys. They want to help you out. Always a special thank you to Vicki for putting all this together and ensuring that we have a successful webinar. So that's it. Any questions at all, Chris?
Not at this time. I think you did a wonderful job of covering a lot of detail. So thank you, Russ.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I know there was a lot of detail covered there, and tried to cover that ground in a short amount of time. I gotta go take a nap now. There's a lot, or at least get a drink of water. So, all right. Well, that concludes today's webinar. Again, appreciate each and every one of our customers, and look forward to an opportunity to serve you in the future.